Hello and welcome to Inside the Avatar Studio. Inside the Avatar Studio brings together innovative leaders from the virtual technology frontier to discuss their perceptions, perspectives, and predictions of what being virtual means in today's society. I'm your host, Kevin Feenan, and with me today is Maria Korolov. Maria has been a journalist for the Chicago Tribune, Reuters, and Computer World with more than 20 years in the field, at home and abroad, from locations as varied as Russia and China. Most people within Second Life know her as the editor-in-chief of Hybergrid Business, and which is an e-zine published by Tremblay International. Maria, thank you very much for being on the program.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Cool. I've sort of been looking forward to this because every once in a while we get the opportunity that we get a variety of different people, but there's rarely do we get a number of people that I can really talk business about in terms of everything that's going on in terms of, you know, Hybergrid and Second Life and all this other type of stuff that's going on. And I sort of wanted to go through, I guess, a number of different things with you. One of which is, and I sort of hate to turn this a little bit into a bit of a business forum on sort of a business lecture, but I mean, if we start looking at the strengths and weaknesses of the virtual platform in general, I mean, you've been watching this over the last, 3-4 years as you've been going through and you've been working through this. How have you been finding the progression of where we were, say, in 2007 to where we've gotten to now?
Okay. Well, certainly the hype around it has died down. And there have been a lot of failed experiments in in-world marketing that didn't go very far. But there's been other experiments in world business that have worked out pretty well, and so people are kind of zeroing in on where virtual worlds make sense. And right now, virtual worlds make a lot of sense for rapid prototyping, and this is what Rivers Run Red does. Say you're building a supermarket. It costs a great deal of money to do it in 3D Studio Maya or in paper and cardboard. You can do it in Second Life or OpenSim very quickly. You can do walkthroughs. You can film walkthroughs. You can change things on the fly as you need to. That can save a lot of money, can save a lot of time. You can bring people in from different parts of the world to look at this. I've seen this done for oil tankers, for supermarkets, for airport terminals. Architects are using this for house walkthroughs. So there's a lot of good reasons for that. Especially now that you can import mesh objects, it's just great for architects and 3D designers because they can bring all that stuff in and place it and walk around it and work with it. So for business, great deal of value is in that. For there's also some value in behavioral change, in training, sales training, working on addiction recovery, those kind of fields, often for nonprofits, some company work as well. Especially when you need to change the environment around yourself. If the environment is static and it doesn't change very often, then a lot of people are moving to Unity. You can now actually import your OpenSim region into Unity and use it inside a Jive world or a Second Places world or something like that, and run it on the web, run it on your iPad or other tablet device, use it for training, use it for collaboration, if the environment is static and isn't going to change for a while. And you can also use it for marketing and marketing-related games. So a lot of stuff happening in Unity. A lot of the 3D developers that used to work in Second Life or OpenSim have been moving to Unity for those kind of deployments because they're just easier for the users to access.
So has Unity then because I mean I'll fully admit that it's been over a year since I looked at Unity, and I noticed one of the things that sort of it sort of excited me about Unity in terms of the fact that, you know, here is something that can be deployed on multiple platforms. I mean, we're talking iPads, we're talking, you know, Wii's, we're talking computers, right? Mm-hmm. But then the whole process of trying to create content for that environment was such at the time that you really had to be sort of neck deep into 3D development to get a lot out of it. So yes. Has that been changing a lot since? I mean, you mentioned that you can now import.
No, not really. Unity is basically a 3D immersive version of Flash. So the kind of skills you need to program in Flash, that's the kind of level skill you need to work in Unity. There's been some attempts to make it a little easier. Reaction Grid's Drive platform tries to bring some of the easier to use tools in there, but basically you still have to have mesh content. You have to have it done by very serious amateurs or professionals. You have to adapt that content to fit the world. You can't just randomly pull stuff out of the Google warehouse and hope that it fits and works. So you pay a lot more money to design a Unity scene. You pay people for the custom programming, development, integration with your website. You might want to export the whole thing to Flash. That is now possible. In the fall, Unity came up with this. And everybody has a Flash plugin installed on their computer, so you don't even need to download a Unity plugin anymore. And you could have a little virtual environment inside your browser or any device. But, again, like I said, typically it's for static content. It's for high-end corporate stuff, campus tours, corporate training situations. You don't expect to be changing it a lot, and you pay money for it. It's not something that you know a team in your office can throw together for an ad hoc meeting. It's something that you plan, you budget for, you hire outside developers for. Or you could walk around it. It's an immersive 3D environment. It feels and looks a lot like OpenSim or Second Life, but it's embedded in a web browser. There've been attempts to combine the two, have a Unity viewer inside a browser and an OpenSim backend tied together, so you're actually using Unity as a viewer to walk around inside an OpenSim world. Typodian was the leading company working on that, but they seem to have kind of abandoned that effort in favor of just migrating wholesale OpenSim regions up into Unity and then working with them from there.
Just as a complete mesh environment.
As a mesh environment, yes. So Typodian will take an OpenSim region, convert it all to mesh, and turn it into a Unity region. And once it's a Unity region, you can walk around it. It looks just like you're walking around it inside OpenSim, except your avatar choice is more limited, and the commands are slightly different. The interface is a little different.
Right. Yeah. It's like I said, I was in there a while ago, and we keep playing around with the idea of going in there. But I know in our particular case, I mean, it's one of the neat things about Second Life is that Second Life sort of made accessible a whole pile of tools that under normal circumstances were very complicated, and they sort of brought them down to the point where just about anybody could use them, right? And that paradigm hasn't sort of made its way over to Unity yet. It hasn't made its way over to just about to most platforms, with the exception of OpenSim, right? Which is very much based on Second Life. How are you seeing the differences and opportunities that are happening now between OpenSim and Second Life? I mean, there's been obviously a lot of movement that's been happening over the last 2 years specifically, right? And where do you sort of see these sort of the typical Second Life user as compared to the typical OpenSim user sort of balancing out at?
Well, you have very different use cases. Second Life is a big social world. So if you're looking for socializing, you've got hundreds of thousands of active monthly users in Second Life. You have 15,000 active users on all the big social OpenSim grids. So there's no comparison there. If you want to sell to in-world residents, if you want to have a popular club, if you want to have a big fundraising campaign, any of those kinds of things where you want access to a bigger pool of potential users or customers, you want to be in Second Life. What's happening in OpenSim is people going over there when they don't need a big mass of users. For example, if you have a role-playing club with 100 members, you can take those 100 members, move it over to OpenSim, have the same or equivalent functionality, and 1,000 times more land for the same price you'd be paying in Second Life. So there's a definite advantage there. If you have a support group with a certain number of members, if you have a school that already has a certain number of members, or a company that has a certain number of members, you can move those people over to OpenSim and get a significant improvement in functionality over the same in Second Life because you have more control over access. You can make backups. There's various things you can do in OpenSim that are useful for schools and companies that you can't do in Second Life. So that's a very substantial advantage. And if you're looking to build and create, you can have a significant cost savings if you move over into OpenSim. And also if you want to have just a small number of friends. You don't need to have 1 million friends. All you need is 5 good friends. And if those 5 good friends move over to InWorlds or Avanation or OS Grid, you can go over and join those 5 good friends on that grid. So over time, there's been this growth in these kind of niche situations in OpenSim, and it's a little bit of a snowball effect. That as more people come over, they attract more people to join them. So somebody asked for advantage for schools. So if you set up a mini grid in OpenSim, you can have it private behind a firewall, so nobody else can access it beside your school. Runs on your school network, so it's super fast. You can make backups of all the regions. You can have a math region, a science region, and you can save them and upload them again. You can save a copy of the entire grid and upload it and restore it anytime you want to. You can have access only to your students and create the avatars for them ahead of time. And of course, it's a significant cost savings because OpenSim is free software if you have somebody in-house who can run it. And if you need to have an outside hosting company do it for you, the prices are ridiculously low. So for a school that's looking at paying $300 a month for a region in Second Life, they can have significantly more land and quite a bit more functionality in OpenSim.
Right, but I mean, even as and actually Andy sort of beat me to the punch in terms of my next question. I mean, obviously there are some disadvantages as well to the OpenSim model.
They're getting to be less and less. So content is an issue, and as I mentioned earlier, the community, the sheer number of people. If you want access to a large number of people and a large variety of content, Second Life beats OpenSim by it's an astronomical margin. I mean, you can't even compare the two right now. We were starting to see some content in OpenSim. Linda Kelly is doing a great job of offering pre-made regions, a lot of freebie content. OpenSim Creations is nice, and you can have a number of people are now offering or selling content throughout the various grids. So that's starting to happen, but it's still much, much smaller than in Second Life.
How are people finding? Excuse me. How are people finding this terms of service restriction that Linden Lab's thrown on everybody in terms of if you build it in Second Life, you no longer own it type of thing?
Yeah, it's a nightmare for schools and companies because they want to be able to own the stuff that they build. And in OpenSim, there's no terms of service. OpenSim is more like it's like a word processor. The stuff you write in the word processor is your stuff. Microsoft isn't going to come along and say that novel belongs to me because you wrote it in Microsoft Word. So anything you create in OpenSim that you self-host or you run with a third party hosting company It all belongs to you. You decide your terms of service. You decide the age limits. You decide what kind of content you want or don't want on your grid. Now, if you go to somebody else's grid, like InWorlds or Avanation, they set the terms of service for their own users. So the grid owners get to decide the terms of service, but the residents on that grid don't quite have the same freedom. So if you get land on InWorlds, you also have limits as to what you can export and can't export, what kind of content you have access to, what kind of behavior you're allowed to engage in, what the age restrictions are, and so on and so forth.
Right. In terms of I guess sort of property value, and by property I mean the brand, the identity. I mean, there's obviously some fairly bigger names in the game right at the moment. I mean, InWorld certainly has been making a big deal about the number of users that they've had, and certainly Reaction Grid has been very, forthright in terms of the fact that they sort of want everybody to sort of, if you want to open up an OpenSim region, they want you to come over there. How do you see the value of some of these in the branding of some of these new OpenSim organizations as they've been gaining more and more traction over the last couple of years?
They haven't been really doing a lot of marketing. They have no brand name recognition like Second Life does. If you walk down the street and you ask people, have you heard of InWorlds? Have you heard of Kitely? Have you heard of Reaction Grid? Obviously, nobody has heard of any of these, but people have heard of Second Life. So, and even if you go down the street in Second Life and you ask random people, have you heard of InWorlds? Have you heard of OpenSim? Have you heard of Hybergrid? Have you heard of this? Many people probably wouldn't have, because it's these are startups. They have zero to no marketing budgets. It's strictly word of mouth. As people find out about it, they come over. They bring other people with them. So it's a very slow, organic growth right now because of a lack of investment on the OpenSim side. I think it takes quite a bit of startup capital to launch a big marketing campaign.
Do you see that as being the lack of, I guess, capital investment in some of these new groups? Do you see this as being potentially a result of what's happened with inside Second Life?
I don't know. There's a lot of other platforms that are getting investment. I think partly it's the economy. Partly it's the fact that you don't need money to get an OpenSim grid going. You could bootstrap it. And when you bootstrap it, the longer you can avoid taking in outside capital, the more of the company you get to keep when you do accept funding. So with OpenSim, I'd say that OpenSim has just started being ready for prime time in the last few months. Before then, you wouldn't even want to take it to an investor because of the lack of voice, of the hypergrid issues, stability issues. At this point right now, I'm finding that my experience in OpenSim is more stable, more reliable. They've got Vivox voice. So you can start selling it to businesses. And Rivers Run Red is selling it to businesses. But it's just got there. I mean, it just got voice in January. It is that recent that it's become actually usable for business and education.
So I guess maybe you've probably hit on all these things, but are these the major things that have changed in the last couple of months? Because I know with Rockcliffe's OpenSim area, I mean, we had voice right off the top. We had a number of these things that were there. Mind you, we were going through Reaction Grid, so I don't know if that's a difference between them and other, as other groups have developed. But if this is starting to come into its own just in the last couple of months, are these stability things the major things that have really changed that environment to the point that people really should be looking at these particular types of things, or is there something more to it that's
I think
been driving?
I think for schools and companies, the voice is the big thing. Vivox, which previously was limited only to the big MMOs and Second Life, finally decided to get into the OpenSim space. And any small grid or nonprofit can get Vivox for free, and any mid-sized commercial grid can pay for a reasonable license. So Kitely and InWorlds have commercial agreements. OS Grid and like my small company grid, we use the free platform. And that Vivox is usable voice. Before you had FreeSwitch, which cut in and out. It was very bad sound quality, no lip syncing. Vivox in OpenSim works the same as Vivox in Second Life, and it's just great. So I know voice is less of an issue for some of the social players or the role playing, but for schools and companies, it is a big deal, and we have that. Stability is great. So the OpenSim folks have refactored the backend system significantly, so that it's up. It doesn't crash. You can teleport. Everything works. It's very nice that way, and it makes it possible to do work in OpenSim because you can do that. And the hosting companies have been improving their management tools, so you can restart a region with a click of a button, or create a new region with a click of a button, download or upload a region file with a click of a button, create new users instantly, without having to go into the consoles and learn how to do all that weird stuff that you have to do when you operate a server. So and that also makes it usable for schools and businesses that aren't technologists. They can let other people handle the technology. It's a simple interface, and then get everything done. So that's also a significant advantage. And Kitely and Dreamland Metaverse are two of the companies furthest ahead in this. Reaction Grid, I haven't seen them do a lot of stuff in OpenSim lately. They seem to be focusing on Jibe. Their main grid, the Reaction Grid itself, is a couple years behind the rest of OpenSim. You can't even teleport to it right now because it's so far back. They've been upgrading their private grids that they run for people. Like Jocadia Grid, finally this month, has been upgraded, and you can teleport from OS Grid to Jocadia Grid and back. So that's nice because a lot of educators are on Jocadia. But they're still they seem to still have some stability problems because they're running on a Windows platform instead of Linux. And I follow the Twitter stream, and I'm seeing the restarts for Jocadia Grid a lot. And I never restart my company grid. It just works.
Right. The organizationally what are probably, I mean, we were talking about Rivers Run Red. I mean, obviously they organizationally they sound actually as if they're probably the most mature in terms of who's out there right at the moment. Are there other organizations that have started to show a little bit more maturity in how they're approaching their organization, both sort of internally and then the way they're offering those services outbound?
Well, Reaction Grid, if you want their Jibe worlds or a private grid, they've got a big team behind it, especially behind Jibe. Kitely, it's a small group, but they seem to be very well run, have a great outreach component, have nice upgrade schedules, and a great user interface, and a very innovative pricing model. They just rolled out pricing last month. Turns the whole pricing of virtual worlds upside down. Other than that, it's still very much a lot of mom and pop shops. InWorlds has a nice team behind it in terms of people who provide support and run the grid and manage the currency. Who else? OS Grid's all volunteers. Most other grids are either volunteers or literally a mom and pop operation.
Right. And how are they comparing right now with what Second Life has been doing recently? Because Second Life has obviously. I'm trying to figure out how to explain this properly, but I mean, the Second Life has turned everybody around so many times that I think we're all dizzy from the number of times that they've changed direction over the last 2 or 3 years. And I'm wondering whether or not one of the things that you're seeing is whether or not there's any stability in some of the messages coming out of Second Life and how they're positioning themselves in relationship to these OpenSim competitors.
Well, as long as they're the top social grid, the #1 place for content and people, they don't have that much to worry about. If they start seeing, the big fear I have is that some of the large groups, like role-playing groups, like Elf Clan, or business groups like Rivers Run Red, or even land barons, where people tend to stay within a certain subcontinent because of a certain group cohesion, say linguistic or role-playing, that the people who do the land for that might decide to up and move their entire group to a private OpenSim grid in order to get a lot more land and more control, because you can make backups of your entire grid. So if you have a large role-playing group, you can make copies of regions, or you can make copies of the entire grid. There's all sorts of controls that you have in OpenSim that you don't have in Second Life. And if that starts to happen, if large groups move over, like as a whole mass, then it will hit Second Life's bottom line significantly. Right now it's a sim here, a sim there, 30 sims here, 10 sims there that are moving over. If you start seeing like hundreds of sims move over at once, and thousands of users move over at once, or tens of thousands of users move over at once, that's going to be a significant issue, and it will snowball, because as people move over, other people are attracted to move over too, and you wind up with fewer people and less property, and property values will drop even further, and it's a bad situation. I would love to see Second Life find out its core mission and really market the hell out of it. I want to see an AOL-style marketing campaign to everybody's mailbox in the United States that forces virtual worlds down their throat, forces them to learn how to use this, the way AOL kind of, by sheer repetition, forced people to go online who really didn't want to, when it first started out, because they didn't see any particular reason to be online. The only people who were online were geeks and nerds and crazy people and stalkers, and why would anybody want to go on AOL? Well, by just sheer force of marketing, they overcame enough of that resistance to get the ball rolling, get the internet moving, get the web moving. And I think that Second Life has a possibility to do the same thing for virtual environments. And it's the only one right now that has that capability. It's the only one that has this AOL-style multi-purpose platform. And at some point, Second Life could drop the walls, open up to the hypergrid, become the default currency for the metaverse, become the default inventory for the metaverse, become the central meeting place of the metaverse.
Right. Let me throw something at you though, because I mean, there's a couple of things that you've mentioned in there which I'm very much curious about. I mean, for example, I mean, obviously there is a huge demand for the ability to be able to import and export content, to be able to hot swap regions, to be able to save work that you're doing with inside a parcel, regardless of who owns what's ever inside that parcel, right? Once something's put down, right? So I mean, if I go into a graphics program, just because I've taken an image from my image library or from the web or wherever it is that I've gotten the image from, maybe my camera, right? Just because it happens to have come from a different source doesn't mean that I can't, save whatever it is, whether I'm working in Photo Paint or CorelDRAW or whatever else, right? And obviously there's a huge market that's out there that's saying, we want this, and Second Life is not providing it. So, I've obviously got my opinions in terms of where they should be going, but are they just simply not getting it? Because obviously there's a need for these services that are being provided by OpenSim.
I think it's the classic innovator's dilemma situation. If you try to serve this new set of customers, your existing customers will get very mad at you, and that's where all the money's coming from. So with Second Life, there's a lot of in-world merchants. There's a lot of folks in here with a lot of invested in the current infrastructure. If that changes significantly, they stand to lose these customers, which are a large group, and they're making money off of them, for a much smaller group that they're not going to make any money off of, at least in the beginning, with the idea that maybe someday, this will be a bigger group. I think that what they should do is as a step-by-step approach, with one step could be that you can export, say, full perm content, and any content creator that wants to who wants to keep it on the grid, just turn off one of those permissions. Kitely does this. They let you download an OR file, but only those objects that you have copied transfer permissions for. Another option would be to add a fourth permission, like a grid only, or allow exports, fourth permission setting. Sticking with the full perms, it just avoids that whole issue of having to create a fourth permission. And this still leaves control in the hands of the content creators. If they don't want their content to leave the grid, it doesn't have to. But it also opens up the possibility that somebody who has all full perm content on their region can, or perms that they have the perms for, that they can copy the whole thing. And it also makes it possible to hypergrid. If you hypergrid from one grid to another, you can only bring the content that's allowed to be transferred and copied to other grids. Otherwise, the content stays on its original grid.
Yeah, I was about to say. I mean, in terms of a lot of the hypergridding type stuff, I mean, there was a lot of hoopla about the hypergridding up front, but then all we saw in terms of hypergridding was, if you had 20 different private regions within Reaction Grid, you could hypergrid between those groups, but you couldn't hypergrid anywhere else.
Well, that's because Reaction Grid was running a 2-year-old version of OpenSim. Right now, you can the majority of the land in OpenSim right now is hypergrid enabled. The Hypergates network has 45 different grids on it that you can teleport between. I have a Hypergate system set up. By the way, I just tested this out like 15 minutes before I got here. I teleported from Hyperica Lower, which is in the lower extent of the hypergrid, through 3 hypergates to a grid on the upper reaches of the hypergrid with a single click by linking gates together. Very big accomplishment. So I did several hypergrid jumps in a row automatically from one destination to another. Then I came here in Second Life and I tried to teleport from one side of the sim to the other, and the viewer crashed. So the hypergrid's getting really good. Some grids are seeing a significant percentage of their travel via the hypergrid. We have a hypergrid currency that's used on 30 different grids. This is the OMC currency from Vervox that does millions of trades a year in Linden dollars. So they know their way around, keeping money safe. That's in use on 30 grids, including some private commercial grids. And you can use it to shop on the hypergrid. If you have hypergrid currency, it shows up in your the OpenSim currency shows up, but the balance shows up in the viewer. You can travel from grid to grid, buy purchases, bring them back to your home grid with you. Hypergrid now allows hypergrid friends. You can send instant messages to people on other grids via the hypergrid. It allows hypergrid landmarks. So as you travel from grid to grid, you can landmark your favorite places and then go back to them. All this stuff happened in the last few months, so you're not going to see it on the main Reaction Grid until they upgrade. It's available to anybody running the latest versions of OpenSim, though. It's really amazing. It's become usable. The hypergrid has become usable, and it's become its growth is going up very fast. I'm tracking the usage growths of the hypergrid, and it's growing fast. Yeah.
Right. How's the I guess the registration process. I mean, once you've registered a avatar in one particular grid, right? I mean, it used to be that you'd have to register, whichever grid that you want to go to, you'd have to go through that whole registration process first, right? Do you still have to do that now, or?
If you want to go to a grid that's Hypergrid enabled, you just teleport to it. You type in its Hypergrid address instead of the local address, and you show up, and your avatar name changes. So, for example, if I'm coming from mygrid.com, when I land on a destination grid, and my name, instead of being Maria Korolov, will become maria.korolov@mygrid.com. So it doesn't confuse people if there's a Maria Korolov already existing on that grid. So everybody has a unique avatar name, their first name, last name at their grid, at the grid.com, the grid domain. And so now you can travel. Your inventory is there with you. You have full access to inventory, depending on the controls that the original grid set up. Some grids don't like their stuff traveling. Most grids that are on the hypergrid have that opened up, so you can travel with your full inventory. And they've added security to it, so nobody can hack into it. It's become really robust. You can spend a few minutes and travel around 40 different grids, hopping from one place to another, picking up freebies everywhere, making friends, attending concerts, and then come back again to your own grid.
Right, but yet, I mean, I believe you had an article on your on Hybergrid Business a couple of days ago, talking about there's some fraud issues that are currently going on with regards to people getting access to credit card information.
Well, yes. If you steal a credit card number, say your work is a waiter somewhere, and you steal somebody's credit card number, now you want to turn that into cash. So you go into Second Life, you buy Linden's with this credit card number, and then you convert it back to dollars, and you got cash back, right? Well, Second Life has installed their security API to keep people from doing just that, because they tried. And so those scammers are now going to other grids that maybe have a weaker security API. So they've been trying to hit in-worlds with the same scam. Steal somebody's credit card, go into in-worlds, buy their virtual currency, and then redeem it back for cash before the credit card owner discovers that his card was stolen and cancels it. So maybe 1% of those fraudulent transactions were going through in-worlds. They were catching 99% of them. But that 1%, they're still out that money. So this week, they've upgraded their security API significantly, because for a small startup grid, even a small number of fraudulent transactions that goes through is still, it's still a hit to the bottom line. And they're operating on thin margins. They're a startup.
Yeah.
So they can't afford to lose it. But nobody's credit card numbers were stolen on the grid. The credit card numbers were stolen somewhere else. Yeah, by the hackers. And then they try to take advantage of that existing theft by converting them into money.
So the entire OpenSim area, these OpenSim grids that are out there, generally they're fairly secure in terms of the way that they're approaching the electronic commerce side of things.
Yeah. I have heard of maybe one case of people losing money in OpenSim, and that's when a grid shut down and people who didn't redeem the money in time lost it. That was Meta 7. They shut down the entire grid. Everybody who had a region on it lost a region, and people who had money in their accounts who didn't redeem it in time lost their money. If your grid uses OMC currency, which is on multi-grids, then that's not an issue. Even if the grid shuts down, you still have your OMC balance. It's like a PayPal balance. It does. If a particular merchant shuts down that takes PayPal, you don't lose your PayPal money because PayPal has it. So here OMC has it, the Webex exchange has it, and they've been around for a long time. So they're not. I mean, they're not 100% reliable because companies go down all the time. I wouldn't recommend that people use OMC as a bank. You keep only as much money in there as you need for in-world commerce. But it's definitely more reliable than any one grid with the turnover of startups in this economy, especially.
Hmm. Have you in your travels through talking to the various different owners and what have you, are you seeing any other new entrants or any other competitive type products that are slowly? I mean, obviously there's Unity 3D, which we've talked about a little bit, but are there any other products that are out there that are sort of coming into this space? I mean, Blue Mars was out there for a little bit and then they disappeared, and there's been a few others that have been similar that have sort of cropped up and gone the way of the dodo.
Well, I don't follow the game space, so the social grids. I know other verses out there that are focusing on sex and gambling, and they're apparently having a good time with that. But they tend to lag behind in content creation. Second Life and OpenSim, it still leads the way in terms of in-world content creation. On the enterprise side, you got quite a few competitors: Protosphere, Teleplace, OpenQuack, Open Wonderland, VenueGen, Web Alive, 3D Explorer from Altidyne, and a whole bunch of new Unity-based virtual worlds. I mentioned Jibe, Second Places, and there's a few new ones that came out that are specifically for conferences, large business events that are based on the Unity platform. Unity seems to be the big push for people developing new virtual worlds because it's got the easiest access. But those are all professional grade environments. You have to have somebody design them and create the content for them. They're not like the loosey-goosey kind of stuff that we have here in OpenSim and Second Life. Yeah,
so much more capital intensive.
Much more capital intensive, high startup costs, much slicker in the end, so more usability. If you are a big company and you want to create a game for your customers to play, to test drive your cars or whatever, you want to do it in Unity. You don't want to do it in Second Life or OpenSim. Unity gives you the biggest bang for your buck, the biggest potential reach for your game.
Right. I want to come back to the thing that you were talking about earlier with regards to marketing, and one of the grids that we haven't really talked about so far has been Spot On 3D. Mm-hmm. And Spot On 3D obviously has had a very unique model with regards to how they've been going about their electronic commerce, and I'm wondering how you see that faring in comparison to where the OpenSim grids have been going.
Well, Spot On 3D is a classic closed commercial grid. Spot On 3D is a lot like InWorlds or Avanation in terms of the business model and TOS. So in that sense, not very different. The big difference between them is that Spot On 3D has been investing in proprietary add-ons. So they have a little plugin that takes the existing Imprudence viewer and puts it into a window on your web screen or on your Facebook page. So and they've filed for a patent on it, and that's been a huge controversy. I don't know how much uptake they've been having. They haven't been publishing any usage statistics in months. They're not responding to any of my emails. The information isn't up anywhere on the website. I haven't heard of any new customer announcements. So I don't know if there's any activity actually happening on that grid. I know they've tried. They've had a couple of events for merchants here in Second Life to try to attract people to come there. But I'm not seeing a lot of news coming out of that aside from the controversy over the patents. The big model, the big game changer is Kitely, because they have a radically different approach to everything.
Right, but I looked at Kitely before, and I guess maybe this is just sort of myself, but I'm not quite sure. But how do I put this? To a certain extent, especially when you're dealing with schools and other type of organizations, right? Kitely's got a model which is based on a fee per user basis, right? In terms of what's there, which is all well and good. And if you're if you're growing and you've only got maybe a dozen people showing up at a time, right, that's obviously going to keep cost extremely low, very competitive compared to anything else that's out there. However, as you start to grow and the user base becomes much larger, right, a lot of organizations want to be able to contain costs. So, for example, we were approached by another organization that has basically said one of the things they absolutely want to know is how much per month are they going to be charged, right? Or how much per quarter or how much per year. And that's very important for budgetary purposes, right? So, I mean, this whole thing where you go in and you say, it might be, $10 this month, but if you get a whole pile of people or you do a big conference, it might be $500 the next month. Okay,
well, here's the big thing about Kitely is that right now, it's not a big social world. It's got like 200 active users in there right now. So it's for internal meetings, events, and school programs. The other thing is that you're only paying for your own access. So let's say for $100 a month, you get unlimited access for yourself. You get 100 regions as part of it. And you get enough credits to cover, a few hundred hours for visitors. Now, you can also have the visitors cover their own costs. It's 20 cents an hour for the users. And that's the default setting, that the visitors cover their own costs. And your first 2 hours in Kitely are free. So if you have a situation where you expect people to show up for one conference for an hour, it's free for them. They don't have to pay anything. So if you're having a single large event, it's extremely cost effective. If you have a region that's up all the time and you don't want to charge your visitors, you want to cover their costs, and these are people who absolutely do not want to pay 20 cents an hour, and you expect to have a lot of traffic around the clock, then you're better off on with a hosting provider that charges you per land area. If you have low usage and you need a lot of land, like if you're a school and you want to have a different region for every classroom, if you're a company, you're doing a lot of prototyping, then you're much better off with the Kitely model per usage, and you can have, and they have pricing plans that are, steady pricing plans. And anybody who comes in outside of that can just pay for themselves, so it's never going to exceed that amount. So it really depends on your use case. For a lot of people, Kitely is a great situation. I think that when they finally open up to the Hybergrid, which they're planning to do after they fix they add in more login options, then you can have a situation where you have your homestead regions and your building regions on Kitely, where you can have as many as you want for a very low price, and have your big popular clubs and events with another hosting provider where you are paying for the land and you have as many visitors as you want, and you Hypergrid teleport between them as you need to, so you can have the best of both worlds. So I think that's going to be very, very interesting. And you can do that as well on an individual grid itself. If you're a grid owner, and I'm surprised that people aren't doing this yet. Second Life could do this as well. You can have your high demand regions running 24/7 on dedicated servers, and your low demand regions running on demand in a cloud, only activated when someone teleports in. You don't have to have a region up 24/7 if it's only being used a couple of hours a month. You can have it deactivated when it's not in use, activated right up when somebody teleports in, and save people a huge amount of money.
Right. I want to sort of change the direction a little bit as we go into the last little bit here. There's all kinds of different business suggestions that you've got on the Hybergrid business website, and I'm wondering where you're seeing some of the more interesting applications of virtual worlds happening over the next couple of years.
Some of the things I'm thinking about is that with an OpenSim Grid, you can have server-side scripting. You can have scripts that run on the server that nobody outside can have any access to at all. Basically, it's like creating new LSL commands from scratch. And this means that people can visit your grid over the hypergrid, and your grid will have totally unique kinds of activities. So you can have breedables that can only breed on this particular grid, vehicles that only work on this particular grid, or other kinds of activities that will only work on that grid. So you can open up your grid to the whole metaverse. Anybody can come in. But if they want to participate in certain kind of activities, they can't steal the content and take it somewhere else because they can't get at the scripts they run on the server. And it can be extremely unique. Combat system, role-playing systems that are totally unique to that particular grid. And I think that's going to be an exciting area moving forward. And we're starting to see a little bit of that happening as individual grids are starting to look at customizing their code bases. And I think that's going to be very exciting.
Are there other things in terms of, but I mean, that's in terms of the platforms. Are there things in terms of applications that are going to run on the platforms? I mean, because I mean, you were talking about things like virtual post offices, right, what have you, right? And I guess so let me give you an idea in terms of where I'm sort of coming from with this. I mean, one of the things a technology has to accomplish is it has to come up with the killer app, right? It's got to come up with that one app that everybody has to have, right? And so, you know, for the personal computer, it was the introduction of the graphical user interface. I mean, as soon as that happened, everybody all of a sudden got it, what they could do with computers. It
was the spreadsheet. It was Lotus 123. Not Lotus, VisiCalc. It was VisiCalc, I think. That
in terms of the desktop stuff, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's examples of that all the way through. I mean, as you go from you know, decade to decade, I mean, there's different types of apps that have come along that have really sort of defined or put the real face on that particular technology or that particular use of technology, right? And, you know, Second Life thought they were going into that particular area in, you know, leading up to about 2007, which was probably their, you know, the big heyday of virtual worlds. And then everything sort of slid off from there, right? And it's you know, if we've been, you know, breaking even, so to speak, we've been doing well over the last couple of years. But, you know, obviously there's a lot of people who are extremely encouraged by where a lot of this stuff potentially is going. And I guess one of the things I'm interested in is, you know, what is the killer app? What is going to get people to put their Blackberries down and say, oh, I want to take a look at what's going on in Kitely, or I want to see what's going on Jocadia Grid, or I want to see what's going on in Second Life?
I think Bevan's right. I think it's community. A community is the killer app, just as it was for America Online, way back at the beginning. You went online to find people that you couldn't find normally. You went there for dating. You went there to communicate with people who are far away, so you could send them emails, to look at forums and discussion lists. Forums, I believe, were huge in America Online at the beginning. So you went there to find a community of people that maybe you didn't have access to where you live, or not convenient access to, or maybe just haven't found them yet. I think that the same thing is going to happen in virtual worlds, where you go online to find this community, to find like-minded people and interact with them at a much more engaging level than you would in an online forum. You do get a sense of having actually met someone when you meet them in world that you don't when you just see their name in a forum posting somewhere. So I think that is the killer app for virtual worlds. People looking for community, for dating, for support, for book clubs, gay and lesbian support, recovery groups, weight loss groups, anything where people need to feel that they're together with other people, and that there's reasons for why they can't find it elsewhere.
So sorry. I mean, how would that be different though from, you know, if Webex all of a sudden made their system, you know, open and free of charge, or, right now you've got these YouTube groups and you've got Facebook where you can use cameras to see, what's going on with a group of people.
Okay,
how does that differ? How do you see the distinction between the two?
Okay. This is why I first got into covering this in the first place. I'm a technology journalist. I spend my whole day online and on the phone and in online meetings and conferences and earnings reports and all this other stuff. So this is what I do during the day. And those platforms are, for the most part, they're not personal communication media. You don't feel like you made a personal connection with somebody. You don't feel if you're a conference call, or if you're at a earnings call, you will put your question into a queue and somebody will answer it. It's much more, you're very distant from the people who you're interacting with. Then I went to a conference in Second Life. It was an IBM conference, and I walked in and I introduced myself to the speakers. And I sat down and I heard their speech and I asked questions, and afterwards I came up to them and I asked follow-up questions and got their contact information, did a little bit of chit-chat. I felt that I had met those people, that I knew them personally, and they followed up with me after the fact, which would not happen in big giant conference call. I think there's significant advantages there for marketing, for sales, for any kind of social support. You feel like you're there with somebody else in this place. For team building and collaboration, this is a significant advantage of virtual world platforms. You don't understand it until you've been there and you experienced it. It is very difficult to convey this to somebody just by writing about it. And no matter how many studies are coming out about the Proteus effect, your avatar affects you, and it hasn't gotten to the average person out there in the world right now. It's going to take, either it will take a lot of person to person, people bringing people in, this is how you can do this, or it's going to take a massive marketing campaign. Like I said, like an AOL style marketing campaign. Until people got online, nobody could see the benefit of going online. Then they went online, and then they went, oh my God, I can't believe I haven't been online before. This opens up so many venues. Unless you have a bad experience the first time, and you're like, oh, I don't know what to do. There's nobody here. This is stupid. You log off, and you never go back online again until, your company makes you get an email address. And so I think that's happening here in virtual worlds. People come in. Once they have a positive experience, they see the potential, they go, oh my God, you can do so much with this. So I think that's going to happen. I think it's inevitable. People aren't paying much money for 2D games anymore. It's all 3D immersive games. And what the kids are doing now, everybody's going to be doing in 5 or 10 years. So I think it's going to happen. I'm 100% certain it's going to happen. How soon it's going to happen, it depends on so many different factors, on the availability of the technology, on the marketing, on investment, on other things happening. I mean, everybody's caught up with the iPads and the tablets and the mobile stuff and the economy and everything else. So there's a lot of external factors coming into play as well. But I think once the tablet thing shakes out and investors start looking for the next big thing, this is where they're going to be looking.
This platform. Maria, I'd like to thank you very much. We're just approached the end of our hour, so that's all the time we have available for the broadcast show. But I would love for you to stick around and stay for a little bit of an after show wrap up.
No problem.
As we sort of go on to our next couple of things here. So it's been wonderful having you on the show, and we're looking forward to good things to come.
Thank you.
So that's it from the Rockcliffe Rotunda. Actually, I'm not quite sure when our next show is going to be. Bevan hasn't given me that information yet, but I'm quite sure it's going to be 3 weeks. Okay, there we go. Our next show is going to be in 3 weeks. So that's it for Inside the Avatar Studio. Inside the Avatar Studio is produced by Bevan Whitfield and Rockcliffe University Consortium. Technical production by Robustus Hacks and Mal Burns in association with Metaverse TV. For more information on Inside the Avatar Studio, please check out our website at avatarstudio.info. Or you can check out urockcliffe.com or subscribe to our Twitter or Facebook fan page at urockcliffe. So thank you all very much, and that's it from the Rockcliffe Rotundra.